Okay. Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Zoomed Unitarian Universalist Sunday morning service. Today, the UU Fellowship at Easton and the UU Congregation of the Chester River sister churches under our minister, Reverend Sue Browning, join together for this fifth Sunday of the month service. We are very pleased to welcome Cassandra Montenegro, who will present the service and a sermon titled Reinterpreting and Rethinking, Rituals and Rosaries. And we look forward to this. My name is Annie Lavin, and I am your service leader this morning. Bojana Lamparska is Zoom call host, along with co-hosts Jim Lavin and John Ramsey. Thanks to them and thanks to Reverend Sue for behind the scenes helping us with this service. We have one announcement from Bojana for Easton. Bojana, do you want to give that now?
Okay. Hi, UUFEers. I'm just making an announcement regarding the picnic at the Dowdies on August 21st. It will start at 2 o'clock for kind of like activities. They live on the river. And then around 4 o'clock is when the potluck will begin. Directions are in the UUFE Life, and you'll be able to find it from them. Okay, that's it for announcements from us.
Okay, and for Chester River, I just want to remind everybody, if you need reminding, that next Sunday we are back in the sanctuary for our ongoing discussions. It will be on house sharing. And the following week, Reverend Sue will be joining us and leading a discussion on excellence and perfection. And my last one was about this picnic, which we are invited to by UUFE, an all-fellowship picnic, and more information will be in Reflections weekly. We read that. And now I'd like to tell you about our speaker, Cassandra Montenegro. Cassandra is a third-year Master of Divinity student at Harvard Divinity School and is a resident tutor at Harvard College. She's a member of the UU Congregation of Miami and is active in the First Parish in Cambridge People of Color Caucus. Cassie is a recipient of the Marjorie Bowens Wheatley Scholarship by the UU Women's Federation and is a Harvard Divinity Schooling Billings Preaching Prize finalist. You can find more of Cassie's writing in two Skinner House publications, Shelter in This Place and the upcoming Multi-Religious Voices in Unitarian Universalism. Cassie enjoys spending time reading poetry in her hammock and walking her dog Foxy and baking her abuela's flan. And that sounds pretty delicious. We look forward to this service together and hear her talk on reinterpreting and rethinking rituals and rosaries, where she'll be asking us to consider what does it mean to re-engage religious and spiritual practices that we grew up with, that meant something very special to our ancestors and might mean something to us. Welcome, Cassandra. And now we'll begin with the chalice lighting.
Hello, good morning to you all. I'm so grateful to be here again. Annie, thank you for the beautiful introduction, to Bazena, John, and James for your support this morning. In this time, as we're reacquainting ourselves to Zoom worship, I'd like you to look around to see what you might have around you, whether it's in a car or at your desk, or maybe you're in your bed, that can serve as some sort of material object or maybe something to touch, otherwise maybe a memory too of a chalice. So, for example, this morning, I'm at my partner's place. I'm not at Harvard College right now. I'm 10 minutes away across Cambridge. And I don't have my own chalice, but I have a beautiful candle that I purchased for my partner. And it smells like tomato leaf. I've never smelled a candle that smells like tomato leaf, but it reminds me of our garden. And that's the candle that I'm going to light this morning in order to invite us into ritual together. I hope that's all right with you all, that it's not a formal UU chalice. But as we know, the tradition of the chalice is really only something that started within UUism within the early to mid 20th century. And it was part of like one of our faith traditions and then adopted more strongly throughout, and context dependent, congregation dependent. So if you have a chalice around you, or if there's a beautiful chalice that you remember from one of your sanctuaries, or maybe a sanctuary from your youth, please draw it to mind as I invite us into our chalice lighting this morning. For all those who are gathered here can mean so many things. But those here from Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Chester River and Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Easton, we light this chalice as a form of ritual, of belonging, of a practice that you share together. Sometimes we share individually, but that can serve as a means of uniting us as Unitarian Universalists. And we recall memories of chalices that meant something to us. Or maybe it's not an image that you identify with, but it's something that you could see is important. Some of those in your congregation, some people in your home. And in that spirit of openness and community and belonging, I invite in our opening hymn, which is usually, it is in the teal hymnals. It's number 1047, and it's entitled Nada te turbe. The words were written by and drawn from a prayer poem by Catholic mystic and saint Teresa of Avila, also known and renamed as Teresa of Jesus, because she did not want to be politically, she did not want to be linked just with Avila. She was a reformer. In modern day terms, she was a feminist, and she won't feature too much in today's service, but I wanted to share it with you all today because as someone who was raised Catholic and identifies strongly with Buddhist ethics and then came to Unitarian Universalism in my early 30s, I was so grateful that this faith was and is capacious enough to have the words of someone who I respected from a young age in this hymnal, and have this Taizé song lifted and sung in our congregations. And today's version is recorded and sung by those not too far from you, those in First UU in Baltimore.
Nada
when I think of the expanse and the breadth of Unitarian Universalism, I also think of when practicing personally as a Unitarian Universalist, and also when preaching in congregations and being in small groups with my peers. I'm also cognizant of the fact that as much as we can be expansive, in that expansiveness, we make room for traditions and honoring traditions that don't, like any religious tradition truly, that doesn't serve everyone in the room. So my offering today, I offer it humbly and with vulnerability, and is a window into my own present engagement with our faith, with the faith of my grandmothers. And it's an engagement that I was ashamed of for a while. I thought I couldn't talk about this in certain UU settings. And it's still difficult for me to bring forth. But I was given some strength through some peers and some support in some biblical scholarship. I didn't think I'd be going to. I knew I had to take classes for the MFC in early Christianity and Hebrew scriptures. It's part of what we're required to take. But I didn't know that on a class, when I was considering the climate, catastrophe, and race, that I'd come across a quote by a biblical scholar, his name is Micah Keel, that would really open up something within me, or something that had been opened at the beginning of my studies. But I was like, what's the place for it? Is there a place for it within this faith? Do I have a place within this faith? And can I bring parts of my identity forth in ways that are loving, that are liberatory, that are not proselytizing in a way that makes people feel the kind of discomfort that maybe pushed us away from varying aspects of the faiths that we grew up with, or were part of our journeys until today. And there's always going to be discomfort, I would say. It's part of the human condition. But what is it that can bring us together and can bring us towards a greater stillness in community and connectedness with those who came before and those who we are responsible to after we all leave this earth, because we will. So this is the quote. This scholar is relying on another scholar. Her name is Lynn White. And Keel writes, rather than jettison, we must re-examine and rethink those traditions that have formed us. And I'm going to put this in the chat. I'm someone who needs to read what's in front of me sometimes. Rather than jettison, we must re-examine and rethink those traditions that have formed us. And I'll speak a bit more in the sermon as to where he's coming from and how that factors into his work and his engagement with the work of Revelation and the environmental crisis. But I think it can be, at least I've applied it in differing ways here. And as we're starting to rethink and re-examine those traditions that have formed us, I invited us into the material element of the chalice lighting. Now, one of the traditions and rituals, I think, that is partly for my UU faith, and I see here in this congregation as well, the joys and concerns or the joys and sorrows.
Joys and concerns or acknowledgments of the heart is a time in our services when we share the joys and the concerns and the sorrows of daily living. It strengthens beloved community as we learn more about each other and share in each other's struggles as well as celebrations. Because we're on Zoom, I have lit a single candle this morning that will represent all the joys and concerns to be shared. And I remember with great gratitude the many who have supported us during the COVID epidemic, and for any of us today who might be struggling in body or in spirit. For the unspoken joys and the sorrows that may remain silent in our heart, let us take a moment now to meditate and be silent. Blessed be. And now we'll have a reading.
Thank you, Annie. So our reading today feels unexpected to me to even include as a reading. Sometimes when I walk into a Catholic church, a place that held me in many ways in my youth, let's say earlier youth, because I'm the point of view that youth can be extended for many years. I used to feel very held, but over the years, I felt less and less seen, largely because of my queer identity. And sometimes I still walk into a Catholic church, be it because I'm reading at a friend's or family member's wedding, or I'm choosing maybe to attend the Mass in support of a friend or a group of people from HDS, to engage in a sense of interreligious understanding and openness that sometimes still feels really hard. So this reading is actually by a Catholic priest that a couple of friends here at HDS who identify as queer Catholics introduced me to. And it's a reading from Twitter, and you'll see why I've chosen it. It has to do with the Rosary. It has to do with his own experience in his youth. And I believe it has to do with his grandmother. So Father James Martin tweets, a confession. As a boy, I never learned the, quote, right way to pray the Rosary, meaning the mysteries and the other traditional prayers associated with it. It was given to me in a little black plastic case with a tiny fold-out booklet. But not having gone to Catholic school or grown up in a family that prayed the Rosary, after I lost the booklet, I just prayed it my own way, which was very simple. The Hail Marys and our Fathers, eventually with the Apostles' Creed, since I knew that from Mass. Sometimes I would wake up and forget about my Rosary, and it would be left behind in the tangled sheets. My mother would often warn me that one day it would fall out of the sheets and land on the floor, and she didn't want to run over it with the vacuum cleaner. Well, one day it did, and she did. When I came home from school, it was on my bedpost, missing a few beads after its battle with our old Hoover vacuum. As you can see, I told you so, she said. I prayed with this Rosary and with many others for years, but in my own way. Once, on a pilgrimage to Lourdes, I was asked to lead the Rosary on the plain in front of 300 pilgrims. I warned them I don't do it the right way. They insisted, so I started. At one point they said, "You forgot to announce the mysteries." I confessed I wasn't able to remember them. I pray with them when I have a guide, but they're hard to memorize. "It's Wednesday," someone shouted. "That doesn't help," I said. On the way home, they asked another Jesuit, my friend Brent Fryan, and he knew them all. I'm still a little embarrassed that I can't remember all the mysteries or the official way to pray it, no matter how many booklets I buy. And believe me, I've tried over these past 50 or so years. But I'm not embarrassed to say I pray the rosary often, sometimes a few times a day, in my own way, now and at the hour of our death. At the end of that tweet, Father Martin invites in a prayer. Actually, he quotes the end of the Lord's Prayer, which was actually the first prayer that that Catholic scholars and, frankly, world historians link to the form that the earliest known Christian or Catholic rosary was prayed by the Desert Fathers, a group of monks. It had nothing to do with Mary. For me, for my grandmother, and I misremember, he talked about his mom in the Hoover. For some reason, I think I just mapped my grandmother on there since the rosary has so much to do with mine. It's about this strong female figure that we can keep in mind and that recenters us. And I don't want to speak entirely for my grandmother here, because her story of her rosary is her own. But what I do hope to do today is, so I have my chalice, today's chalice, and I actually have a rosary that's not mine. Maybe it's mine in this moment. It's been loaned to me. But that was my partner's mother's rosary. And this morning, when I remembered, wait, where is my rosary? It's in another house. I don't have mine. I looked over to this one, and it was draped around an image of the Buddha. And I felt like I was invited in to bring it here and to bring it to our experience. So before we began this sermon today, we were invited into a greater time of deepening and reflection together through several rituals, which we marked together along the way. And even the unnamed ritual, I think the one that we were kind of talking around and definitely been using, even our time together here on Zoom can be considered a form of ritual, of a practice of repetition that for some can have even a sacred sheen. Not all rituals need to be sacred. As we know, language changes with time, as rituals and practices change with time. And even this gathering and the format of it and the nuances of it can change with time, the way that we change. This is an opportunity, once again, for these two congregations, your two congregations, to join your gifts with one another via Zoom. Now, we've mentioned, we talked about, we are a bit out of practice, and there's always some nervousness and fumbling when we are out of practice. I would say it's in these moments of unease where there is the greatest opportunity and the greatest need to invite in stillness and joy. Suffering and imperfection will exist. We are humans at this human work. We are humans living in a material world. Yet in our humanity, there is the opportunity to re-engage with the world and its traditions. The traditions that have brought us here, that have sustained, and yes, at times even hurt us. With new eyes and open hearts, we might see them and experience them in a different way, and maybe in ways that no longer hurt as much. When I first began identifying as a Unitarian Universalist over 8 years ago, I was all about the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, combined with the mystery and wonder. You heard about the term mysteries earlier in that reading. I'm still figuring out the differing meanings of that word. But I saw it in UUism in a variety of ways, and in print. And I was also drawn to the many sources of our faith as someone who identifies in a variety of ways as interreligious, as multi-faith. What I didn't know then, when I first started going to the Congregation of Miami, who welcomed me with open arms, is that this journey into a faith tradition that so many of us call our own has brought me further into a faith tradition, into aspects of a faith tradition that I ran from for so many years. And I ran for a host of reasons. Anger at the limitations and the repression as I felt it, and I saw it at the patriarchy, the censorship and denial of homophobia, and the hypocrisy, the deep hypocrisy. And in an effort to make peace with these feelings and sitting further with this anger and frustration, sitting with anger is not something that I thought I was raised to sit with. And I think maybe through the practice of the Rosary, I realized that maybe I was taught in a certain way to enter into a different form of contemplation. I bring this offering, these reflections to you now. So there is going to be some anger, and there's going to be some joy, and there's going to be a curiosity that's still ongoing. A curiosity about how best to honor my ancestors, about how best to honor my grandmother and who she was, now that she's no longer on this plane of existence. Many Unitarian Universalist churches are peppered with former Catholics. I know I'm not the only one. And it's something that I know anecdotally, especially after I began writing and preaching on my multi-faith journey within this faith and speaking to others about it. What I haven't really spoken of when it comes to my Catholic faith is the import of ritual to me, especially rituals that tie me to family. In my case, the ritual of the Rosary. We know that prayer beads are found in a variety of other faith traditions. It's hard when you're looking at, when scholars look at a variety of images, because I'm not sure sometimes whether miniatures are holding necklaces or prayer beads. However, scholars do believe that some of the earliest form of prayer beads were found within Hindu practices. And it's over the years, I started gravitating towards prayer beads of another tradition that I was partly raised with. Alongside my little pouch of the Rosary, I carry a Tibetan mala that actually I purchased at a General Assembly from a beautiful craftswoman who made the mala for me. But it wasn't until more recently that I started coming to the idea that certain rituals that, like the Rosary, within the Catholic faith, could still and did still hold meaning for me. And when I think of the reading that I read to you early from Father Martin, and I was exposed to it in a group of some of those queer Catholic friends of mine from divinity school, that there could be a gentle and loving message of openness and informed experimentation, that something could be freed in me, and frankly, and in my family, leading up to my grandmother's death, that could provide some sort of peace and dialogue. I want to ask you at this moment to think about what the rituals and traditions you have discovered on your ancestral journey thus far are. Are there some traditions that come to mind? Some traditions that you want to learn further about? My grandmother Mela was the only person of her generation in my immediate family who was able to see and accept me in the more liberal parts of myself and in my identity. I never got the chance to tell her that I'm queer or introduce her to my partner, and it was largely out of fear. I wish I had. I wish I had given her the chance to see more of me, and I wish I had found ways to connect with her. But I did get to tell her that I found a faith tradition where I could preach and write and be with other people who were interested in dialogue. I did get to tell her that this faith journey would take me all the way to conferences and general assemblies across the United States, and to study in Boston, the city she first emigrated to in exile from Cuba. And even though it was years after we did attend our last Christmas Mass together at her parish, the parish where I was baptized, I did get to pray the Rosary with her at her bedside. See, I used to think that I first learned about the Rosary in grade school from a nun at the school I attended. Sister Rose taught us about the apparition of the Virgin in Fatima, Portugal, to young children, talking to us about an element of mystery and wonder. And she talked about how the Virgin entrusted these children, these siblings, with the prayers. However, that was, to a certain extent, transferred or taught to me through book knowledge. What I first learned, and then continually have learned of the Rosary, has been through observation, through practice, through my grandmother's ritual. It was her ritual that she prayed almost every day of her life that I knew her, without fail. I never asked her who taught Mela this practice, another question, or another matter I wish we had talked about. But I knew she did it with her mother, Ana Lucia, who I call my abuelita Ita, at the kitchen table, prayer books, prayer guides, and wooden or metal or plastic beads in hand. I even remember that one smelled like roses. And I think that's why I love the smell of roses to this day. But I'm still stumped. I wish I knew, who did Mela learn this daily contemplative ritual from? A ritual that would sustain her. Was it from Ita? Was it her mother? Was it from friends in her young Catholic women's group in Cuba? And when did Mela begin the daily practice? Was it when life got really difficult during the revolution? Was it when she was in Boston, or when she had to leave her community here in Boston and go to Miami? Something she really didn't want to do. She loved it up here. Or was it after a resurgence of the practice in the late 20th century due to particular interest in contemplation and in Marian devotion by the Pope at the time, Pope John Paul II, who was a religious leader she highly respected? I like to think that amidst the trauma and the pain and stressors of exile, the rosary was my grandmother Mela's mode of quieting her mind, of centering herself, of connecting with her God and the Virgin Mary. Even though Mela and I likely saw God and the Virgin in differing ways, I knew it was important to her. Through stories about some of the women in my partner's own family, I learned that my grandmother's practice was something not uncommon in Latin American Catholic female practices. Years later, when her eyesight started to go and she couldn't see the images in that guidebook of the mysteries, like Father Martin said, that she memorized a lot, but I don't think she completely memorized the orders of the mysteries, and they shifted. As do many rituals. There used to be only 3, and now there are 5, and that happened in the 20th century. I had at one point made a blown up version of it in large fonts and put it in a binder. But for some reason, and I think she used it for a bit, but there's something about the materiality of holding this smaller book, and even though she was straining to read it and holding her rosary in hand, that linked her perhaps to a practice with her own mother, and a practice she had carried most of her life. The last time I really said the full rosary with my grandmother that I can remember was last December. She was unexpectedly hospitalized, and my partner, who is not a particularly religious person, nor really likes the mention of God very often, even in our home, she reminded me of a practice that she used, and that she used to sit with her mother, who loved the rosary, when her own mother was passing. And she told me, go sit and say the rosary with Mela. So I sat there on Christmas Eve, and I said it. I remembered what Father Martin said, and knew it wasn't going to be perfect, and I was fine with it. I fumbled through it in Spanish, and she mostly listened. I didn't know how much she was hearing. But at the end, this last prayer that I don't particularly identify with, but clearly she did, she repeated it with me. And it was such a moving moment. There was such connection, and I'm so glad that I spent that time with her, and that she had shown me this practice that meant something to her, and quite frankly, I think sustained her through some very difficult times in her life, and even at her death. A few days later, from that experience, I'd returned to Cambridge, and a few days later after that, she would be sent home to home hospice. I learned that my grandmother, my mother, who had resisted saying the rosary for years, said it at my grandmother's side. And after my grandmother died, my partner offered to play it with me. My partner even offered, and partly did even pray it with me this morning, because I was so nervous to be sharing this with you all today. While UUism gave me an affirming space for my queerness, as a Unitarian Universalist, it's been a struggle knowing how out I can be about my Catholicism. And as someone on the ordination track, it has a different kind of sheen and responsibility. When I bring up my journey with Catholic faith, might I be triggering someone? Might I be harming someone who's been injured in ways that I can't fully understand? Because we each have our own journeys and our own experiences. Rethinking and reimagining Catholic and other rituals from my ancestors, for me, is an ongoing process. And I think the rethinking and reimagining Unitarian Universalist rituals is an ongoing process within Unitarian Universalism. This rethinking and reimagining and trying to approach it from a variety of lenses, a queering, an ethical perspective, a historical perspective. It's one that's allowed me to interrogate and question and still very much love of what formed and informed the beginnings of my journey as a person of faith in this life, as a person of faith in this tradition that I'm proud to say that we share, this Unitarian Universalist tradition. However we each come to it and wend our way through it in community, in partnership, and on our own. It's my faith in the principles and the people that keeps me asking questions and not settling for the status quo of who I should be or what I should believe or who I should love. I can be queer and you. A friend of mine identifies as a queer Catholic. Can I be a Catholic you? A queer Catholic you? I still don't know. What I do know is when I pray a rosary, when I hold it in my hands, it's both my grandmother's, my partner's mother's, and it's also mine. Our closing hymn for today is one that so many consider the singing of a ritual of UUism on its own. We sing it at HUMS, the Harvard Divinity School UUs, and we sing it in so many of our congregations. It's number 123, Spirit of Life, and the recording we hear today is by All Souls. Familia, as we make our way back into the hubbub and complications and beauty of our lives, I invite you to think on what it means for your heart to re-engage religious and spiritual practices that you grew up with, that meant something to your ancestors and might mean something to us in our communities, in the sharing of the moments that gave you and them and your family solace. Learn about them, try them, gather in group, connect with your ancestors if it feels like something that feels right for you to do. Amén y bendiciones a todos. May you go in peace.
Oh, lifted up, love bless your way. Moonlight, starlight, guide your journey into peace and the brightness of day.
Thanks to Cassie this morning for a very special service and words to take to the heart. And also thanks to each of you who joined us for today's Zoom service. Being Zoom, we can stay online for a bit if your schedules permit to have questions or reflections on today's service or even to socialize a bit. So John and Jim and Brizena, if you'll keep us on and we'll see how many stick around for us. That would be great.